Welcome back to EB Insights. I'm Sandra Dreyer. On today's episode, we welcome Ben Phillips, who is an employer brand, talent marketing, and advocacy leader based out of the UK. Ben has created some incredible resources for employer brand practitioners around calculating employer brand ROI and doing it in a way that is really valuable and will resonate with the C-suite. We talk a lot about how he came up with this, as well as sharing some of his resources for you, which are on his LinkedIn profile. But I really think this is an incredible episode for anyone in employer brand, especially when you are coming into budget season and want to really think about how to advocate for your budget in the right way. So I hope you enjoy this episode. We had such a great conversation. We actually talked about quite a few other topics, and we will share those in future episodes. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode around employer brand ROI. Welcome back to EB Insights, the podcast for all employer brand practitioners or talent leaders who are impacting their company's employer brand. Today, I'm very excited to have my guest, Ben Phillips, who is an employer brand and talent marketing leader with experience across recruitment, culture transformation, learning, leadership development, and consumer marketing. So it's a really great mix. We've had a podcast before with someone whose background was consumer marketing, Tiffany Pedersen at Amazon, and we learned a lot about some of the tactics that are easily parlayed between consumer marketing and employer brand marketing. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about that today with Ben as well. Ben has led multinational teams delivering complex projects across multiple sectors, and he's here today to share some of his insights and perspective on the evolution and the future trajectory of employer brand. So Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Ben, before we get started, I would love to hear a little bit about your background. I always love to hear from people how they navigated into employer brand as a profession. So take us through your career journey a little bit.
Yeah, I think you gave a perfect summary. So, but how did I get here? So, I did a marketing degree, came out of university, still not knowing what I wanted to do, and I fell into recruitment. And then fast forward, I took that in-house where I've always had a thing around learning and development, and I managed to pick that up in my first in-house role. My role split from recruitment into L&D. And then that went, as I progressed further in-house in another business, into leadership development and culture transformation and all those types of things, which then, this was around 2010, so going back a bit. And this was at the time when people were saying, oh, recruiters need to act like marketers. And I think they're still saying that in some quarters. And I took it literally. And I was working for a company where I was very fortunate and I could make that leap. I'd finished a project in culture transformation, L&D, leadership development. I wanted to get back into the marketing side of things, having originally been doing employer branding and talent marketing when I went there originally. And I went into consumer marketing for a few years and worked on some projects. Ended up heading up a small social media team for the fashion label of this big UK retailer. And then got into social media quite deeply and so on and so forth. And more recently, the last several years, I think I found my rightful place back in employer branding and talent marketing. So that's how I kind of got here, more by luck than design.
Yeah, we have kind of similar stories. I started in marketing as well, but on the public relations side. So I was in PR. I did do mergers and acquisitions in the cultural sort of merger acquisition piece. But I also worked in learning and development and sort of again fumbled my way into the world of employer brand as well. So I think it's similar trajectories, but then there's that sort of foundation of communications and marketing, which is extremely important in this role.
Absolutely, and the threads I always say, the really kind of TLDR version of when I talk about my background is people, communication, content, and technology. Those are the four threads I've been lucky to pull through my career. And again, whether by luck or by design, I've managed to pull them through, whether it's recruitment, obviously people, communication, you need content, you need technology to facilitate that communication, whether it's learning, leadership development, you're communicating, it's not just face-to-face facilitation, but it can be online and it can be bite-sized forms of learning, which comes in the form of a content, whether it be a short video or written long forms. There are lots of similarities. It's how do you get people, how do you communicate with them using content and pushing that sometimes through technology. So it's that basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since you and I both stumbled into this industry, it's changed so much, right? So I remember when I first started the employer branding role, so to speak, about 10, 15 years ago, we were launching our social media channels. And the theory back then is just post and people will come, right? So you just post a bunch of content, and the more content you have, the more followers you'll get.
Let's just hold that moment, Sandra. Let me just reminisce about the lovely days of organic reach in social media. When it was
yeah.
Can we just have a moment just to remember that, please?
Rest in peace.
Absolutely, rest in peace.
Yeah. So what are some, I mean, obviously social media is a significant evolution and just the way people use it and how important it is in day-to-day lives. But what are some of those other things you've seen really evolve in this space in your time?
It's interesting you say it's really evolved, because it hasn't. If you want to see what talent marketing and employer branding are going to be doing in 5 years' time, look what consumer branding is doing now, because they have bigger budgets, they're closer to the top lines, they can have more fun. So there is some evolution. In areas there's sophistication. Similar to you, in 2008, 2009, employer branding was, can you cajole some stuff, get some content on Twitter and Facebook as it was back in those days, and just pump it out? And people were talking about building communities, but they weren't communities, they were audiences, because it was broadcast comms, not multi-directional peer-to-peer comms. So that's definitely, the peer-to-peer element is definitely a big factor in it now. And I think similar to PR, right? I think societies and the audiences, the people we're trying to engage with, are so desensitized now to overly polished, beautifully wrapped messages which is tied up in a nice PR ribbon and forced down their throats. People just don't buy it anymore. But you are seeing an evolution towards companies realizing that the people they're trying to engage with are getting more sophisticated. And so how do you become more genuine and show the obviously the great things about working somewhere, but the realities of working there too? So at a high kind of philosophical level, I think that's how it's changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting too, when you're talking about authenticity is thrown out so much, but I think what I pull away from that is people don't want pretty pictures. They don't want adverts. They want especially how much people live on their phones. They like the raw, dirty, even though of course most people don't post their real lives on social media, but they will act like they do. So I think, it's interesting. I think one of the things that you and I have had quite a few conversations around, that sticky topic of ROI. But it is one of those topics that I can guarantee anyone who's listening to this right now has struggled with, which is how do I justify the return on investment of employer brand? And it is going to be different for every company, for a lot of reasons. It could be where the employer brand function lives. It could be how shared is that function and those responsibilities. Does it, solely sit on the head of employer brand? Does it solely sit on talent acquisition? Is it a shared investment with communications and PR or marketing or branding in your company? So there is not a magic wand that says if you use this and say this, you will justify ROI, because it is very specific, I think, to the company structure, culture, etc. So I want to start to touch on that, because you have had a lot of great insights and sort of ways of thinking about this. So if we can break it up into little chunks, I think the way to start would be, how did you start to approach this? So regardless of what your company structure and function is, what are some of those things that honestly we can't Google the answer to, right? We need to have that sort of understanding about what we're using and how we're using and talking about our function. So where do we start, and where should people start when they're thinking about advocating and justifying the return on investment?
Okay, so let's take it right back with everything. Context and communication are the foundation for all understanding and alignment, right? So what is ROI? Are you talking the literal sense? And I think that's where it starts to fall apart straight away. And I go to lots of conferences and I read lots of things, and someone says ROI, and you go, oh, right, they're going to talk about money. And you're listening to the response, and you're listening, and they're talking about media metrics, and they're talking about content engagement metrics, and they're talking about employee engagement metrics. You're like, okay, the money's coming. Where's the money? And then the answer stops. You're like, I thought we were having an ROI conversation. But I think if you're talking to finance, and as I've got older in my career and more experienced, I'm facing more into senior leadership or the C-suite. 10 years ago, ROI was all the things people talk about. And then someone took me to one side and said, that's not ROI, that's cost benefit. I'm like, what's the difference? Does it really matter? This is just semantics. They're like, no, it's not semantics. Not when you're in front of the CFO, it's not. So I had kind of a baptism of fire with that. An ROI is a simple mathematical calculation. If you speak to your EFD and says, what's ROI? They'll say, it's investment gain, take away investment cost over investment cost. And the answer they're expecting is a percentage. So if you go, depending who you speak to, but if you come to talk to me about ROI, and it needs to be about dollars and dimes, pounds and pence. And if you're not, then I think that also maybe gives our industry a bad reputation. So start there, right? Let's have a clear definition. Let's all agree. If it's ROI, it's money. If it's about all the other halo effects of what you're doing around reputation and warmth and retention and attraction and costs associated with all of that, ROI happens where the money bit happens. That's all very important, but that's cost benefits. It's bigger. So there's that. And I think also the wrong question to ask, although I totally get where it's coming from, everyone asks the question, what's the ROI of employer branding? Not a clue. Too big a question. Which part? All of it? Some of it? You need three things for it to be an ROI question. It has to be activity specific, it has to be time bound, and it has to be connected to something financial. So instead of what's the ROI of employer branding, what's the ROI of talent marketing? A better question to ask in a real specific, I like to be practical. For example, and because of Clickify and your advocacy roots, a proper ROI question would be, what would be the ROI of piloting an advocacy program for the next 12 months? So it's time bound. It's advocacy, so it's activity specific. Now, ROI, when it comes to calculating ROI in the literal sense, in the C-suite, they typically care about five things. You know, are we making money? Are we driving down costs? Customers new, customers existing, and are we mitigating risk? There's more than that, but those are the fundamentals. If you're in a commercial operation, you are meant to be a money-making machine. As ruthless as it might sound for some people, that is commercial business. Now, in employer branding and talent marketing, it's very difficult to attribute anything we do to the top line. A salesperson makes a sale, you look at the P&L and you say, oh, a spike's gone up on the revenue line, or they don't make a sale and it flatlines. The employer brander who worked with a recruiter to hire the salesperson that made the sale, you're 6 degrees separated.
It gets
from the
lost.
P&Ls.
Yeah.
Exactly. How do you attribute what you've done to that? I think in those things I mentioned that the C-suite care about, where we can definitely demonstrate ROI, is cost reduction. So if you're going to do a cost comparison, it's right. We have 5 buckets full of cash, and those buckets are labelled website, digital advertising, agencies, with the recruitment agencies, marketing agencies, or RPO, and You've got 4 or 5 buckets. You don't go to the CFO and go, can I have a new bucket, please, for this new thing I want to do? Because they look at you and go, no, you've got 5 buckets. Choose which ones you're going to empty to fill your new bucket. And that bucket's going to be advocacy in this case. So you go, well, we're spending X on marketing agency to create content, or we're spending Y on media. what if we dial those down to use something like advocacy, and can we try and forecast what we think the impact to our brand? So the other way of calculating ROI, to the calculation I mentioned earlier, is the cost of doing a current activity, take away the cost of trialing a new activity, times that by 100, and that will give you a percentage. And we can go into details on that later.
Yeah. So not to lose. So to go back and just kind of reiterate some of the points that you made, and that's why I started by saying, being able to say what's the ROI of your entire function, but which is basically what you're saying when you're telling an employer brand practitioner what's the ROI of employer brand. You're basically saying what's the ROI of you having a job here and what are you doing? It is, to your point, it's got to be tied to some kind of a financial metric. So it's is it tied to a budget? Is it tied to an expenditure, a cost? Is it time bound? And it's got to be activity focused. So Correct. You were talking about employee engagement, and employee engagement, I think it's a great example of a new activity that could potentially replace a current activity like marketing spend, advertising spend, not replace, but could supplement. And so, what you're saying is, instead of coming to, let's say, all of us after, we're entering the summer months. So it's a great time to reflect of what has happened in the first part of this year. Did you meet the metrics that you had anticipated meeting? You might be going into a slower season with holidays or, slower hiring, but this is a great time to look at that and, rethink how you're going to go into the fall months, especially for anyone who's looking at pulling together budgets in the October timeframe, September, October timeframe, which is when most of us are looking at the following year's budget. So when you break it into those areas, like you had said, of, this is what we're currently spending, this is what we anticipate getting out of that. Are there ways that instead of creating the new bucket, you could use what you already have allocated to try something new? And I think that's really important too, because you might be able to do that without any permission whatsoever, especially if you're looking at an advertising spend where, there are some contracts you go into an annual contract, but for most you're going month to month. So what if you did try, especially in the summer months? It's a great opportunity if you're allocating money in the summer months and you're thinking it might be a slower time. Would that be a good time to start one of these other ideas and say, hey, let's reduce our Indeed spend this month by X amount, and let's put that amount into promoting an employee advocacy program or using an employee advocacy software like a Clickify, for example, to say, is there a way that we can use some of this opportunity in this time to see if we can get something more out of our investment? Because to your point, if I went to a CFO and went into detail on everything that I'm planning on doing, but they could care less. They just don't care. They don't need to know the specific actions of what I'm taking. They're looking at bottom line. They're looking at how much investment I'm asking for, and they're looking to see is that level of investment important to us right now? Because that can fluctuate. And then B, is that investment reaping benefits for us? And if so, what are those benefits? So I think these are really important points to highlight in terms of, stop looking at it as an overarching and theoretical calculation, because we could sit here for another hour and go into all the theoretical calculations of how much more important employee advocacy and an employee talking about your brand is than your company. But when it comes down to what our CFO, our investors, even the leaders of each of the businesses who are allocating the budgets within their lines of business, they don't need that information. They need this other piece of it. So I think that's really important to highlight.
I'll just give two very quick examples. One is around advocacy, and go to my LinkedIn profile. I've shared a tool. It's free to access. You can go in there, punch some numbers in, and it's got guidance about building a business case and a finance model for advocacy, because this is what I had to do in my last company. If you go and play with the tool, maybe you could link to it somewhere, Sandra, to help your audience. But and look, I have nothing against marketing agencies. I have nothing against media vendors. I've been agency side. I've been client side. Everyone does a fantastic job. But when you're in-house, you've got to take from Peter to give to Paul. There's no fresh, new bucket, as I said, of cash. And you can use this tool and you can work out if you invest X amount of dollars into advocacy, and that would be some technology, people's time to run it, manage it, program manage it. And you say, based on the numbers you punch into this thing, you go to your CFO and the conversation isn't, can I have $75,000? I want to do an advocacy program. They go, no. You go, we are currently using marketing agencies and media spend to impact our brand in a certain way, and it's costing us $250,000. I've done some number crunching, and I think we can achieve the same impact on our brand affinity and our marketing impact by doing advocacy, and I think we can do that with an investment of $75,000. Ergo, I'm saving the business X hundreds of thousands of dollars to increase the overall business's profit margin. Would you be happy to have a conversation? They'll go yes, because you're talking to them in their financial way. You don't go in with the detail, you go in with the headline to pique the interest, and then CFOs being, detail and scrutiny by nature, they'll go, explain to me how you're going to do that. And it gets the conversation, and then you can go into the detail to whatever level the CFO individual wants. That's one way. It's not just about advocacy, it's CRM. I've worked in a business where they had, and it's a huge global business, and they had a CRM full of 7 million profiles. Ridiculous numbers. Now doing some house cleaning, spring cleaning of it. And we said, okay, let's be sensible, right? You go, okay, so 1.75 million profiles in this database. And then you get some stats. You go, right, what's the average cost per hire? And I looked at LinkedIn and Glassdoor, and they both concurred. It was about $4,000. And with all this, you take a pinch of salt, right? Because depending on your context, which I spoke about being important earlier, if you're in white collar senior leadership, your cost per hire is going to be much higher. If you're frontline, high volume retail, hospitality is going to be much lower. But for all intents and purposes, $4,000 cost per hire. And in this organisation, we understood, well, how many applications do we need to make a hire? And for every 100 applications, it was 4 hires, so 4%. So you took 1.7 million people sat in this database of 7 million, being uber conservative. And you go, okay, 4% higher rate. So for those 1.75 million, 4%, that's that. Okay, and $4,000 per hire. Okay, that's that. It was something like $248 million worth of talent potentially sat in that database, being extremely conservative. And everyone went, that's a big number. So I asked the question around the table. Okay, let's be even more conservative. To what percentage of accuracy of that number are people comfortable with? And you go around the table. 10%? 7%. Come on, guys. 5%. Let's go 1%. Is everyone happy with 1%? Can we go to the CFO with 1%? They go, well, of course, it's 1%. Okay, great. That's still $28 million. Let's take this to the leadership team. So again, it's being financial. Now, it's not all about finance. I totally agree. Branding is about emotion and mental priming, and how do you do that? But if you're having an ROI conversation, it's about money. And that's, I think, hopefully some really practical examples and some models that people might go, I've got that data to hand. I can do that. I can have that conversation, help my boss or my purse string holders part with some cash.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And for everyone listening, we will link Ben's profile in the descriptor below, because he does post a lot of great tools, a lot of great insights, things that you can parlay and sort of customize and make relevant in your business. So thank you for that.
Steal with pride, please.
Absolutely. Steal with pride. So, okay, let's get out of the ROI money conversation and let's get into some more fun discussion. Thank you for joining us. I hope you really enjoyed that discussion. I know I did. I learned quite a lot and am looking forward to sharing some other excerpts of our conversation. In the meantime, please do visit Ben Phillips' LinkedIn profile, which we will link below, and you can get access to some of the information and tools that he created. And please continue to stay tuned for future podcasts of the EB Insights for employer brand practitioners. Thank you so much.